What's going on, everybody? What's going on tonight?
What's
How are you
going
guys
on?
doing?
Hey, thanks for jumping on, Kip. This is awesome to have you on tonight, man. This is so cool.
You know, I live close. It's not hard to come to Kicker and climb in the studio. It's easier than doing any setup at home, so here I am.
Yeah, I took it. I was just saying, like, I was like, man, this guy's going. He's the one-man show right now, so he's been like running back and forth with the camera, making adjustments. But yeah, guys, it's Rolling Thunder. It's episode 17, and obviously, as you see here, and to the other side, we have a very special guest tonight in the room, Kiplitzy from Kickers In, the Unmasked. This is Kiplitzy Unmasked, episode 17. I got our co-host Andy and Casey on here. What's up, gentlemen?
Come on. Good to have you on, Kip.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking.
Heck yeah.
So, Scott, why'd we bring him on anyway? What do you want to ask him?
You know, this guy's, I'm not going to toot his own horn too much, but, he's pretty notorious for his weekly show that gets blown up pretty quickly, and the Kipisms and Twisted Tea and all that stuff. But Kip never gets to talk about Kip too much. He's always interviewing people. So I wanted to drag this guy in here tonight and take the time out of his Friday, which we're very appreciative of. And I want to find out what got Kiplitzy into car audio. I want to find out what he was doing on the early installs, and then how we got into where he's at today. And I think we got some pretty cool stuff to show out on the table there whenever we get past that.
Absolutely. I mean, you just want me to start? You want me to just tell you? Or?
Let's go at it. Let's do it, man.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Brian, good to see you this evening. Or Byron, sorry, I think I missed that. Byron, what's going on, man? Bobby B, good to see you, sir. I look, unfortunately, I don't look quite as old as I am, but the hair is starting to give it away. I'm actually 54. I've been playing around in car audio, electronics, wiring up my own gadgets and gizmos, computer programming. I actually started writing computer code, taught myself BASIC.
I know BASIC.
I was about 8 years old. And by the time I was 10, what was cool for me is, when you first start back then, you could get, whether it was a Texas Instruments TI 994A or Commodore VIC or an Atari 400 and then the 800, all those basic computers in the day. And I cut my teeth on a TI 994A, a Commodore VIC, and a Atari 400. Those were the machines I had. And by the time I was 10, if you were into any of that at all, you could always get those magazines every month, and you could just type in the code from like 14 pages of stuff, and you could create your own games. And basically, you were typing in the code to do that.
Or
and
if you had one little blip, it was ruined.
One mistake, it's like, why is that doing that? What do I got to? So you got to go back and do it. So I've always had an eye for detail. And so catching those errors or not making them in the first place really came easy for me. And I finally got to the point that I'd learned enough and I understood the coding process that I'd go, okay, here's asteroids. I want my own version of asteroids. So I would literally just sit down in front of the keyboard and start coding, and I made my own version of asteroids. I made my own version of Space Invaders. I made my own versions of Centipede on an Atari 400. And so, you learn all about peek, poke, commands, looping, if then, conditionals. It's just all that. And so I've always been that guy. It's just been one of those things that has come to me. Wiring, switches, lights, knobs, transistors. I got into it at a young age. So it's probably no coincidence that I got into car audio, because we all, at least, I don't know if kids today are as excited about getting their license in their first car as we were back in the 80s and 90s. I think a lot of kids today are more excited about getting their first cell phone than getting their first car. But to me, it was all about the car. And the next thing after the car, keys was freedom, and you had to have audio, because I'm not saying it's necessarily completely true, but all 16-year-old guys assumed if you had great audio, you could at least go out and pick up chicks.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Definitely helped.
Full clip boogie tilt.
Absolutely. Full tilt boogie, and away come the babes. They just come trolling you.
What's fun, Kip, is my girlfriend now is the one thing she remembers about me from high school. The thing that stands out the most, she always talks about the Blazer I had with the system in it.
There you go. So it is something. Guys, and I have to say girls too, because some girls had some systems back in my day. But there weren't a lot of people that had big systems. Now, my very first system wasn't big. We all started somewhere. I admit I started on a cassette deck. And went from there. I used power boosters and 6x9s in boxes that I made. Junior, and I don't even know if they offered anymore, but like when I was going to school in junior high and high school, I was very enthusiastic about taking metal shop, wood shop, all that kind of stuff because it taught you a ton of skills. And I learned to take those skills with me. So building speaker boxes, I was really good at it the first time I did it because I took wood shop in high school and actually built my first enclosures for my car in high school. And it was a pair of wooden enclosures for a set of 6x9. So at least I wasn't running around with the 6x9 sitting in the back window with no box. I had boxes and they sounded pretty good.
That's funny you say that. You built it in wood shop. I tried doing that in high school, and they told me, no, I can't do that. It's taking up too much wood. I'm like, are you kidding me? So I had to build a spice rack.
That's awesome that you do that, though. So, I was the exact same thing. I took the shop class, the mechanic class, and I actually ended up working for my construction teacher in high school, like as a full-time job. And so, like, I would literally he would like literally be like, you can go do what you want to do. Bring me back a Chick-fil-A biscuit. Like, you were in here in class. And I think it's insane. I wish I had no idea that you did the Commodore stuff or the basic stuff. I have a Windows 98 gaming rig over here with a Atari card in it for emulating Atari games to do a MAME arcade with. But yeah, I learned all that stuff too. The tech class in my high school, even though this was the early 2000s, was like straight up 1985. Like, yeah,
So that's kind of what I was into, and what made me happy was to do all that kind of stuff. I'm going to share this story because I think it's absolutely hilarious. So the way I made money before I could drive, so I got into electronics and computers at a young age. And so 12, 13, 14 years old, I had a paper route. And if anyone out there ever did papers, delivered papers, you get on your bike and you got them on the front and back and you're out there slinging. I was really good at riding a bike no-handed back when I was younger. Man, you're just slinging papers, riding a bike. But on Saturday and Sunday, the paper came very early. And of course, I wanted to get up out of bed and especially on Sunday, because you had to put the inserts in, roll the papers, and then go out and set them out. And they'd usually deliver the papers 4 in the morning. So what I did, I ran a doorbell out to the front porch. I actually lived with my grandmother in a mobile home, and it had just a kind of an enclosed patio porch. So I ran a doorbell buzzer out to the front porch door, and then I ran some 18-gauge speaker wire from that, and I routed it under the trailer and found a hole and came up in and tucked it under the carpet and the floorboards and ran it through the bathroom and got it back to my bedroom, and I hooked it up to a transformer and a buzzer. So when the guy would stop and deliver the papers on Sunday morning, he'd hit that buzzer, and I was up out of bed immediately knowing I had to get my papers ready. So
that's crazy.
That's actually pretty impressive, though, that you were like putting that together at a young age, though, man. Like, I think there's so many things as car audio enthusiasts that like translate as being other hobbies too. Because like, if you do like car audio, you like computers, you like doing other stuff as a go-getter. And I think it's cool. You are a go-getter, man. It's awesome.
You do. And so the funny thing about this story is, if you mentioned, I said I had to run the wire through the bathroom. And when I ran it through the bathroom, I shoved it underneath the bathtub. I mean, I put it under the tub.
Oh, wow.
So I'm in the shower one morning, getting ready to go to school, and I reach up and I grab the shower head to adjust it, and I get the living piss knocked out of me. I mean, I get shocked like you would not believe. And I'm like, what the? And so I step back, I recover, I reach back up, and nothing happens. So this goes on for probably 3-4 weeks that I'm randomly getting my butt shocked in the shower. And it's not no light shock. I mean, if you've ever taken a pee on an electric fence, this is what it is, except you're in your own shower. And so finally, I'm thinking about this, and of course, my logic kicked in, like, okay, I've never gotten shocked in the shower before. What have I done or what's changed that is causing a shower shock? Well, when I went researching, when I shoved that cable under the bathtub, I had ripped the insulation and it was laying right against the copper pipe. And so every now and again, I would just get a random shock from the 24-volt AC transformer that was running the doorbell.
Dude, that's insane, man. Like, I wouldn't want to, you don't want to tell your parents, like, hey, Mom, Dad, the bathroom shower is shocking the crap out of me, but you don't want to tell them.
Kip, you tearing apart my bathroom again? Come on, what are you doing?
Yeah. I know. Like, dude, young Kip has gotten really into this home renovation stuff here lately. He's just knocked it out in the bathroom.
And for the water, AC voltage hurts.
Yeah, fortunately, I guess 24 volts can't kill you because I'm still here. But let me tell you, it will light your world up when you're covered and wet and you're in the shower and your feet are grounded on the drain plug. It makes a great path.
Maybe that's why you're so energetic today, buddy. You just had a few.
Yeah, it was really electric.
Yeah, just like gave a little spark in you, a little jolt, and then
short-circuited. That's all.
You're giving away my secret. Once a week, I go over and just plug into the wall outlet. And that's how it works.
It's actually Shazam.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know what it was. I started, making grade A's everything I did. He's like, yeah.
So,
that's crazy.
So I just always been attracted to those kind of things. And of course, my first car system, and I go back, I can tell you my first car audio system and my first car, it was I had it for such a short period of time, I don't even know if it's fair to call it my first car, but my first car was a 1972 Audi Fox. And it was a used car, obviously. Four-door, had a 4-speed. Loved that car, but I destroyed it pretty quickly in an accident, which is a complete another story. But in that car, I had a Sanyo. It was brown, a lovely European German brown. You know that color that all the VWs and it's not pretty, but
I think I found it.
it was brown, and
about
it was
to pull it
not
up.
pretty. But that was my first car, and in that car I had the boxes with the 6x9s in it. I had there it is. That's it.
That's the car.
That's it.
That's the one.
Is that the brown or is that the tan? That
No,
looks tan.
the other color, the darker brown, the one he
Yeah.
had. That's it right there.
That's
that
the
color.
only one I could. That could be yours. That's the only one I see that color brown. Okay.
Wow.
It's so that was my first car. I had a Sanyo AM/FM cassette deck in it that had fast forward and eject on the same button knob. If anybody remembers those, you push it once to fast forward the tape. You push it all the way in to eject the cassette. I had would have been at that time. I think I had a Majestic. It could have been Pyramid. EQ booster that had the built-in spectrum analyzer, red, green, yellow, red lights, sliders. Pair of 6x9s, and I think it was a pair of 5 1/4 in the front door if I remember. But that was my first car audio system, but not obviously my first big car audio system.
Still
Was it
decent for
amplified
your
or no?
first setup. You know what I mean? You had the EQ. That's all you need.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
back
it
then, a lot
helps
of people didn't. Yeah, and that was your amp. For a lot of guys, that EQ with the plus 25, that was your amp. Like, that's it.
Completely your amp. And, moving beyond that, I mean, I stayed in EQ boosters for a long time. When you're young, you don't have any money. At one point, I had a Targa. They claimed it was 80 watts plus 80 watts, which we both know is complete BS, but it was about probably a good solid 20 watts by 4. And it had the push button EQ where the red LEDs would move up and down as you adjusted the EQ. Had one of those in another car for a while. So I went through a lot of different systems, but probably my first big system, I had 2 big systems as a teenager / young adult that to me were awesome. And my first one, it was I'm going to remember this, is an 82 Honda Accord hatchback. And kind of a weird car. I learned to love hatchbacks because hatchbacks sound great. It's easy to get big bass in a hatchback.
Absolutely.
And in that car, I had a Pioneer 3-hole or a shaft AM/FM cassette radio. And back in that day, it was a pretty high-end radio because it actually had auxiliary inputs. There you go. Honda
No,
Accord.
see, I'm building a 79 Civic.
Oh,
and
you're
it's got-
building one. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I'm doing 2 Comp Q12s in a wall.
Oh, that's going to be sweet.
But you were saying,
Wall.
so-
So I had that car with the AM/FM cassette in the dash, and they weren't the first. They were the second one to come out with a CD player. My first CD player for the car was the Sony Walkman, the D7 or D10. Might have been. Yeah, it was a D7. And then Pioneer, I think, was the first car CD player, actual DIN-shaped car player. Kenwood came out right after they did, and so I had the Pioneer cassette deck, and the first DIN cassette or the first DIN CD player that Kenwood came out with was the KDC9. I remember the model number to this day. And so I built a console underneath that Honda, in that Honda Civic, right in front of the shift handle. So I had the AM/FM cassette in the dash with auxiliary input, and then underneath it I built the console out of wood and I wrapped it in vinyl, red vinyl to match the red seats. And in that I had the KDC9 CD player and the KEQ. Man, I can't remember the model number. It was the half DIN Kenwood EQ that had the spectrum analyzer built into it. I had that. Did you really?
Yeah, I got it out of my my dad put it in like 96 though, so it would have been early 90s. Yeah, but it was a Clarion Pro CD player and a Kenwood.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I had that, and then I had 2 Kenwood amplifiers that was KAC. They were so far back, a lot of people know the 920, the 820, or the 21s. Mine were 10. They actually had a 10 in front of them, some of the first original Kenwood. So I had a Kenwood 8020 and a Kenwood 9020. The 8020 was running my mids and highs in that car, and the 9020 was running a pair of home speaker cabinets. They were, if I remember right, they were TAC branded. They had a pair of 12s, a mid and a tweet, and I went in and disconnected the mid and the tweet, came out on a separate set of wires, and I had those home speaker cabinets in the back, and they were my subwoofers.
I think
We've all
everyone's
been
been
there.
there. Yeah,
We've been there.
Andy beat me to it. I mean, like, so, you know, when I was young, my dad did all the car audio stuff, and he was a dealer in a shop, and, you know, I didn't have a car or anything like that, so I'm like, home audio was the stuff, and I think everyone started out playing with the home audio and had the room set up and trying to throw car speakers in it. I kept blowing amps, though. I couldn't figure it out why. It'd be that, you know, I only had 10 speakers chained up this thing, you know,
You just gotta wire
Yeah.
them all in series.
Yeah.
You'll be good. Trust me.
until I go full volume, then it just died.
Yeah, then it's like
That sounds like what you still do today, though.
Oh,
No.
I didn't learn.
Full volume is not. No,
Then my next big system, I was actually working at a store at this time. So the cool part about working at a retail store is I was able to get all the gear at either dealer price, or if there was an accommodation program with the vendor at that time, you could get it at a much better price since you're an
Right.
employee. And so I built my first big system, and that would have been in my 87 Honda Accord hatchback. It was a brand new car. I bought it new off the lot, an 87 Accord. And that car, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers because I don't want to lie to you, but it was probably about an 8 or 9 cubic foot box in the back, tune ported. It had a set of MTX RFL 12s in it. And then I had another cabinet behind that had 4 MTX RFL 7 mid-bass drivers. Then in the back shock towers was normally a location for a factory 6.5. I took the factory cover off, I cut it out and made my own plate, and inside of there I had an MTX RFL 5 mid-range and an RFL T1 tweeter. Then in the front of the car, I had a set of Kenwood KFC. If I remember right, they were 6090s. They were a high-end 6.5-inch coax down in the bottom door. And then I had a set of tweeters up on the sail pillar. They were Kenwood as well. And then I had a set of 3.5-inch mid-ranges. I took the vents on both sides of the car and I glassed them off and cut a hole. And I had a set of 3.5-inch mid-ranges up in the dash.
Yeah.
And then if you remember Kenwood, it was called the KEC 300, as if I remember right the model number. It was a DIN-shaped electronic crossover, and I actually put that into the center console down the Honda so I could control the output of any of the amplifiers right from the front of the car. And if I wanted to adjust the crossover points, I built in little slide rails. I could actually slide that KEC piece out, and I could adjust the controls on the top. So if I wanted to lower the crossover point or adjust anything, that's the piece right there. That's the one. And so in that car, I had all that. And as far as amplifiers, I had a KAC 1020 on the subs. I had a KAC 920 on the mid-bass drivers. I had a KAC 820 and a KAC 720 running the rear speakers. And then I had a KAC 8020, excuse me, not 80s, 8020 up on the fronts and a KAC 7020 on the fronts. And and it was fully active. That was my first system I did where every speaker had its own amplifier and everything was driven out of that crossover. And I guess I've earned the nickname here at Kicker Clip, and I can tell you I've probably earned it for the right reasons. I like playing stuff right out to the ragged edge. I mean, I'll take amplifiers and speakers and everything right to the breaking point, and then I bring it back just a little bit. I don't like listening to distortion, but I run everything to the ragged edge, and that's where I like to run it when I'm in party mode. Mm-hmm. And that car, that 87 Accord that I overbuilt like that, was the first car where I learned that with an electronic crossover and proper protection and everything, I never blew tweeters again. You know, learning and doing stuff, I was always blowing tweeters. When I went full active and dialed everything back and learned about proper crossover points and everything, I never blew another tweeter. I still played the system just as loud, but now I wasn't blowing speakers because I had the amplifier not clipping, and it was just an amplifier for just the tweeters. So it was doing that car and then the variations of it moving forward, because of course you're never done. You always add gear, but that car, I wish I could capture what that car was like, because it was literally, and we're talking this back in 1987, this car would do a 145, and it would do a 145 just about full bandwidth. I mean, I could be driving out in the country. My brothers who lived way out in the country with my dad, I'd go out to visit them, and of course I'm just hammering the system. I mean, when you got something like that, you're doing it because you just want to hammer, and I'm hammering. And I pull up and my brothers are like, "We knew you were coming 5 minutes ago." I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "We heard you for 5 minutes." Mm-hmm. And I was like, "No way." So my brother, he hopped in and he drove the car out, and he wasn't kidding. I mean, and you could hear it. And it wasn't just bass. I mean, you could hear some mid and some high, and it just kept getting louder and louder and louder. I had a guy who went to concerts all the time, and he sat in the car, and of course, in that Honda, literally, you could turn and face each other and talk, and all you'd see is lips moving. You couldn't hear each other. All you'd see was lips moving. And he said, "This is the cleanest, loudest car I've ever heard in Rivals concerts I've been to."
Right, that's what I was gonna say. You had everything covered. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you had 6.5, 5 mid bass drivers, subwoofers, pillars done, everything in a tiny little car with two 12s. It's
And
gonna
they're all
sound good.
efficient.
You know what I
Everything's
mean?
super efficient back then too. So like 'cause,
Everything
they're one
was
big motors.
way efficient.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about like those RFL woofers back then. They still played low. Now it wasn't floating baby moving air low like you do today, and a lot of
Like this
the
guy
heavy
does.
mass long throw duff, but that thing would play all the way down to 20 cycles, no problem. It had a sunroof in the car in this 87 Honda Accord, and I'm not making this up, guys. I could take a 16-ounce Pepsi bottle, and I could set it on my sunroof and turn it up, and then, hit a song that's got a lot of bass into it, and I would pop that Pepsi bottle off the car a solid 18 inches.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
it hammered. It hammered.
Especially higher frequencies. I miss those days with my old Solo Xbox. People be putting pop bottles on my sub and it'd go flying. That higher frequency stuff.
I'd keep the whole car. I'd wax the car all the time and wax the glass because everybody wanted to put something on it and watch it move. Because when I'm saying it would pop a pop bottle 18 inches off the roof, I'm not exaggerating. It was pretty cool.
That's great. How old were you when you had that setup?
So that would have been 1987. So 85, I would have been 20, 21.
Well, you were pretty loud for being 2021
Yeah,
and had
that's
the right equipment
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't 140, so I was a grown man. Okay.
I still had a capacitor back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I never had the capacity.
Consider one of your systems too, 'cause that's like how I like to do my system too. I turn it up right to the threshold between safe and just complete destruction, like right there in the pocket. It's like there's something about it, man. Like when you can find that threshold and you're just playing with it, it's awesome, man.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, and of course, I'll admit, I didn't play it that way all the time. There were times I didn't play it that loud. And ironically, I was that 20-year-old that when you got in the car, I had earbuds or, hearing plugs, earplugs, the foam ones on a cord. I had them hanging off my rearview mirror because when I was going to go into jam mode and I'm just driving around to jam, I would put in earplugs. I really would. Which is why today I still have even for being 54, because we all lose some as we age, but I've always worn hearing protection when I'm in a really loud car or mowing the yard or using a weed eater or a chainsaw, anything like that. I've always taken care of my ears because it's one of those things that when you lose it, it never comes back. So I want to enjoy it as long as I can.
Yeah, our buddy Joe here, Cigar Joe in the corner, our good friend and our teammate. He has a very insane loud system along with Casey here, but he also keeps earphones on his enclosure loading wall that way in case he needs them or if somebody getting a demo is.
I've never seen anyone use this.
Yeah, still, but they're there just in case somebody
Yeah,
wants
right.
them.
It
But yeah,
says
that's the-
mid-range and higher frequencies is going to make you go deaf pretty
Yes,
fast,
right.
and you won't even tell. You know,
Yeah.
when you get out of the car and your ears are ringing, you already did a little bit of damage. You know,
Scott's doors are so loud and it's like the vocals are just so strong. It's just like and I'm like, whoo, it's loud.
Yeah,
I can't handle it.
It's just to see that. But ask Joe though. So like that's how I won this last show. When I said we pulled into the show at like 8:47 in the morning until 5 p.m. when that show ended, I literally played my system full volume nonstop. They were like, they're like the show's over with now. I'm like, okay.
I love play when I want to rock out. I like a system played and I like, that's a great word to put there. I like it in the pocket. And every system's got a pocket. Sometimes the pocket isn't where you want it to be. And if you try to go louder than the pocket, all you're going to do is break stuff. Mm-hmm. And if the best wisdom, if I could impart on anyone, if I could just touch them and just let a lot of the wisdom, wisdom is what you learn from experience, and experience comes making mistakes. So that's how you gain wisdom. So if I could touch someone and let some wisdom flow out of me, here's the thing I'll tell you, is gain and bass boost and EQ and all these. I mean, there's one side of the camp that says, bass boost's horrible, don't use bass boost on an amplifier. Then there's another side of the camp that goes, I use bass boost all the time. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. What it really boils down to is don't clip your amplifier. And gain is, an EQ is gain. Gain is gain. And this is what I learned with that big system that Honda I had, is when I would go from different genre music to different genre music, or learn is like, okay, I could turn this volume up. I could crank my subs up and get more bass if I would pull out and maybe change the crossover point, or I'd go to the EQ and back some frequencies down. Or if I turn the volume down, I could go into the EQ and I could do a lot of boost at really low frequencies and get a nice, real warm sound that I like at a lower volume. But man, if you're going to start wigging it back up, you got to go to that EQ and bring that gain on those controls back down. It's not just a set it and that's for everything. What you're listening to and how loud you're listening to it is going to change where you need to set gain or equalization. And so, like, my home subwoofer at home. I mean, I'm cursed to be not just a car audio guy. I'm a home audio guy. I'm a home video guy. I just like all that stuff. But at home, I've got a little parametric EQ that runs into my 15-inch subwoofer for home. And if you look at the EQ on that, I've got a rise in response that starts about 50 cycles and boosts all the way down to about 28 cycles. It's a boost rolling up curve, and it's a lot. It's probably 9 or 12 dB of boost. Most people look at that and just go, "Oh my God, that's horrible." I go, "Well, hold on. I got all that gain dialed in here because at the volume levels I listen to it at home, I like that warm, fat, kick me in the pants response when I'm sitting in my chair. But since I got all this gain up here, guess what I got to do? I got to go to the gain on the amplifier and bring that down. Because clipping is clipping. You can overdrive an amplifier and speakers whether you do it with gain or you do it with equalization, because equalization is nothing more than focused gain over a specific band of frequencies. And if I could just touch people and I could get them to understand gain and equalization and clipping, any system can sound great and loud. But just remember, all systems have a pocket. And if you don't like the pocket you're in, that means you need to get more efficient speakers, more efficient box, more power. You need something, because what you have has a pocket. If you try to go beyond that pocket, all you're going to do is break stuff.
I love that you bring that up too, because like and that's the one thing a lot of people don't take notion to. Before I forget about it, when people are like, "Oh, I tuned it with a DD1 or OS cable," you're like, "Yeah, bro, you can change from AM to FM. You can change from FM to freaking CD player, Bluetooth. It's going to be different. You're going to have different, stuff on that." B, and I love that you put it that way too. And it's the same way. People need to be more mindful of. It's not that the bass boost stuff is bad, especially if you're using RTA, trying to use it to fill in a specific frequency void that you're missing. But you're being more mindful of stacking filtering. That's right.
Here's the thing where I think a lot of, first off, because I've been doing it so long, and I think because I had a natural inclination to be technically inclined to computers and programming and wiring circuits, I kind of got it a lot easier than I think a lot of other people do. But some people think that gain is a volume knob. First, it's not. Please stop. It makes it louder, but it's not a volume knob. So gain, today, a lot of people struggle just to get the gain set properly in their amplifier, and it's like, whew, I accomplished that. And then they'll turn around and they'll add a lot of equalization. And equalization is literally the bass and treble control in your radio, or the 5 or 7 band EQ built into your radio, or an underdash EQ, or the bass boost built into an amplifier. And what everyone needs to understand is, start with everything flat, get the gain on your amplifier set properly. Now, if you don't like the way it sounds, at a moderate volume level, go in and do whatever equalization you like, and when you get it to where you like, go, man, this sounds great. I love the way this sounds. Now, go back and reset the gain on all your amplifiers, because what you're going to have to do is turn them all down.
Sure.
So, and
if you're using your radio output subwoofer route and you have it set on like an 80 pass low crossover at 24 dB, and you go back to your amp and you do the same thing, guess what? You have doubled your crossover slope filtering. So that's another thing people to be mindful of too.
You've went to 48 dB basic. If you stack them and they're at the same frequency, you've gone to 48 dB, which is almost literally a brick wall filter. And the other thing is, the cool part about 24 dB productive crossovers is with 24 dB Linkwitz Riley's, you're back in phase. You're basically one cycle ahead. So wherever you cross over your woofers in your mid bass or your woofers in your mid range, depending if you're doing a two-way, three-way, or four-way system, at 24 dB, you sum flat and you're back in phase. Now, if you stack two filters together and you're at 48 dB, you just rolled your woofers another cycle forward. So now your woofers are out of phase by one cycle with everything else in your system.
I had no idea on that one.
See, that's something cool to learn too. I didn't know that the dB slope had anything to do with the phase, but I guess it makes sense because the speed and the frequency and all that fun stuff. But that's cool, like how you bring that up with the crossover stuff, because I do mess with that with the KX2400, because there's a lot of options with the bass, the Q factor of just where the bass boost frequency boosts at and all that kind of stuff. But with my system, how low I play, I've noticed that I can actually, really turn down my low pass and just get a little bit more gravy out of it, because I'm not playing super loud on those higher frequencies where my enclosure is just not good at, and I'm just wasting power.
Exactly. I think the biggest thing that gets lost on people today, and like I said, if I wish there was just an easy way that I could just literally touch a person, and the wisdom, which means I made a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes taught me a lot of things, and there's a lot of people that I've interfaced with over the years who are smarter than me, because if I'm going to have a conversation with someone, I want to learn something, I want them to be smarter than me. because I'm that guy. If I call a tech support line, you might as well take that book that tells you to reboot it, have you pulled the card and put it back in, have you checked your cables. You need to throw that book away. And so usually when I call a tech support line for like DirecTV, DishNet, you take your pick, the guy I talk to, my first thing I say is, can I speak to your supervisor? And he's like, what did I do? I said, no. I said, you're going to read out of a book, and the problem I've got is not going to be fixed by your book. Well, you know, sir, I said, I know everything to check. And finally, I had a guy admit one time to me, we went through all this stuff, and he'd ask, I say, yes, done that. And I said, and oh, by the way, I've done this, and this. And he said, oh, you're not an average customer. I go, I tried to tell you that.
It's like me every time I call Directed. Oh, my goodness. Or when I did call, now they're, you know.
Casey took and was showing me too, going back on the phasing. He was showing me where a lot of people, especially if you're using multiple amplifiers, if you're not phasing the amplifiers, they'll be out of phase out of the box as far as like between a few degrees of it. So that's something people need to be mindful of also. Yeah. And before we go forward into it too and sidetrack too far, how did Kip Litsey get into car audio professionally as a career? We're at the halfway mark in that.
All right, true story. I'll share it. So I graduated high school. My best friend, Cliff Boyer, not that you know him, but just Cliff. Cliff and I were best buddies from 6th grade on. We did everything together, and we went to college together. So he and I both went out to Ohio State campus there in Lima, Ohio. So I went to Ohio State. I went for computer programming and business management. So computer programming is a major, business management is a minor. And Cliff did the same thing. We went to college together. We both had, you're going to college. He and I actually lived together. We had part-time jobs. And if you can look back, at least I look back on it, and it was some of my poorest but most fondest memories that I've ever had. I'm making probably $12,000 a year in a part-time job that's almost full-time hours. I'm going to college. I've got grants. I've got loans. And, you're trying to juggle life. And I was on my own. So I'm paying half of a place with him to rent. I'm paying I'm paying my full car. I'm paying my car insurance, my gas, splitting food costs with a buddy. But looking back, it was some of the best times I ever had. But I was out. I actually had a part-time job. I worked at a place called there's a lot of jobs I had, but I'll go to this one first. My first real job was I worked at a place called Rinks. And basically what Rinks was, it was a chain in Lima, around Lima, Ohio, which is close to where I grew up. So it was a chain of stores that were in the Ohio area. And it was kind of like, I don't want to call it a super Walmart, but it was kind of like a super Walmart, except they didn't sell cold things. They only sold processed foods. So like Little Debbie snack cakes, potato chips. They had a lawn and garden section. They had an automotive department with oil and filters, and they had the Sparkomatic display selling Sparko products, and they had a health and beauty. So think of like a super Walmart, but no cold stuff. So that was my
like
first.
Like a Dollar General,
Yeah, except a lot bigger than a Dollar General.
Yeah.
And so I was working at this store, going to college, and I was wanting a radio at that time. And so I go down to a store in Lima, Ohio, and it was called Heart Audio. They're no longer in business anymore, but they used to be in downtown Lima. It was actually Heart Audio, and the next door was Heart Jewelry. So it started off as an audio and jewelry store. We're talking back probably in the 50s, back when audio wasn't car audio. It was, home consoles, record players, that kind of thing. So that's what the store was, and of course it evolved over time. And they were one of, if not, no, there were two places in town you could go shop for audio. There was them, and it was Classic Stereo. That was the other place in town. So I'm at Heart Audio, and I'm just looking at their displays, and I'm looking at tape decks and CD players and all this stuff. And this salesman is talking to a guy, and the guy's asking him all sorts of questions about what to put in his car. What radio? Do I need an amplifier? What size speakers fit? And this salesman, and I don't mean this to be disparaging, but there are a lot of sales guys who do not have a clue what actually goes into a car. They're just sales guys. Now, there are some sales guys who know what they're doing, but it seems to be there's fewer of those and more of the guys who are just sales guys. I got people skills. I take the order from the customers and I give it to the engineers. So he's there talking, and this salesman couldn't answer any of his questions. And finally, the salesman goes, well, let me go ask somebody. So the guy wanders off, and I'm just standing there. And I just asked the guy, I said, what are you looking for? He told me. I said, what kind of car do you have? And he told me. And I said, well, what do you listen to? How loud do you listen to it? And everything. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you what. I said, I've actually installed a systems, a couple of those, because in junior high and high school, once all the kids, your friends, found out you can install stereo gear, I did a lot of installations when I was in junior high and high school. And I continue to do them even in college. I just like doing it. And I said, listen, I've done a few of those cars. I said, based on what you're telling me, get this Kenwood KRC 2000. I said, it's a high-powered radio. It's about 10 watts by 4. I said, get you a pair of these 6x9 speakers. They go in the rear right underneath the factory cover. And I said, and get a pair of these 6.5s. They'll go right down the front door. And he said, well, there's no place in the front for a speaker. I said, man, don't worry about it. He said, there's carpet and plastic. I said, pop the door panel off. You'll see the steel's already pre-cut and pre-perfed. Said, just line up. Cut the front. You'll need to run your wires in. I explained the whole thing to him. I said, he said, you think I can do this myself? And I said, well, if you can, I said, you can find someone to help you out. But I said, it's not that hard. So the salesman finally wanders back, and the guy just looks to the salesman and goes, I'll take that radio, give me those speakers, and write me up. And the salesman was just flabbergasted. He didn't know what to think, but it was a sale, and I basically closed it for the guy. So they wander off. Yeah, so they wander off to do their thing, and I'm just... Hopefully this doesn't get me in trouble, but my grandfather had a term for me when I was a kid because I wouldn't leave anything electronic alone. If it had a power switch, an on-off button, or a knob, he said, Kip, he says, you're a great knob dicker. He said, you just won't leave anything alone. So I'm there in the store, and I'm just trying everything. I'm playing with all the stuff. After a few minutes, this guy behind the counter, he says, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I go, sure. He said, you seem to know a lot about putting stereos and stuff in cars. He says, have you been doing it a while? I said, it's just something. I said, I've done my own car. I said, I've done lots of cars in high school and junior high for guys who found out I could do it. I said, I still do some occasions. I said, it's just something I do on the side. It's not something I'm looking for. And he said, well, would you be interested in a job? And I looked at him and I said, not really, because I was happy with what was going on. I'm going to college. I've already got a job. He's like, well, he said, don't tell me no. Let me explain what I'm looking for. I said, all right. He said, we have lots of people come in here and sell them gear, but we don't have installation services here. So they go out and have to get somebody to do the install for them. He said, it sounds like you know what you're doing. He said, I just like somebody that I could put on call, that if a guy comes in and they buy the gear and we sell it to them, that they call you. And he said, it's all on you. He says, you can go out and look at the car. You can tell them how much you're going to charge me. He says, I need somebody that knows what they're doing to install the gear. And I said, man, cool. I said, I'm really not looking for a job doing that. I said, I appreciate it. I'm just doing this stuff on the side. It's just I can make a little extra money when I do this. I said, but I appreciate the offer. So I went back over and I bought what I was looking for and I went out the door. I thought about it a couple days and I'm like, it might be cool to have someone who's feeding me a little bit of extra work on the sides because, like I told you, I'm making almost no money and I'm paying all my own bills and I'm going to college. So I'm like, I like to eat, so maybe I could use a few more bucks. And I can be in control of it because, like he said, he's just going to give them my number and they're going to call me.
Yeah, it's on your time. Yeah.
It's on my time. So I went back to the store and I talked to him and made that arrangement. So I gave him my money and that's what happened. People come in and buy gear. They'd call me, I'd go out to their house. And so I'm going out to people's houses or people's businesses. And I was a mobile installation service. So I had all my tools and everything I had in my car. And I would pull up. And of course, it's Ohio. So winter, spring, summer, or fall, I'm out there. And if it was fall or winter, I'd make sure they had a garage. So at least I could work in the garage out of the snow. But I'm doing install. Yeah. So I learned a whole lot even more about how to talk to people, how to work on their level, how to be personable, because I'm the guy introducing myself, telling them what they're going to pay me to do this and doing all that, and then I'm doing the job, so I learn even more about car audio. It just kind of kept going and going and going, and I started going, I really like doing this. I enjoy it. And the guy who owned that store, he came to me after. I was probably doing that mobily for maybe a year and a half or so. And he said, he says, we're looking to actually bring someone in-house. Would you be interested? And at that point, I said, sure, I'll come work for you. And so I went to work directly at that store doing installation. And, of course, that moved into sales and the whole 9 yards. And so I was with Hard Audio for a while. I worked for them. I worked for a couple other audio stores. I actually worked for a place down in between Dayton, Ohio, and Cincinnati for a while called Radio Outlet. They had 4 different stores in the area. I worked for them as a while. So I've worked at a couple different retailers. There's probably not a brand of gear that you can mention the name of that would be from, the mid 80s through late 90s that I didn't install, sell, or deal with. I mean, it's just, but that's how I got into it. It was by happy accident. I helped a guy out who was looking for gear, and apparently the guy behind the counter was impressed enough that he wanted to get me on board.
Did you have a system that you remember that was impressionable on you, or like as far as like what you just the home audio stuff translated to car audio, or did you have a buddy that had a big car audio that you were like, man, I want this, or what?
2 things. I'll share them both. The first one is, like I told you, I lived with my grandmother, which is my dad's mom. I lived with her. She basically raised me from the age of 12 up. And she liked music. She was into music. If anyone remembers the Columbia Club where you can get 12 free, and then you had to end up buying 12 more or something over the years. So Granny, that's what she was to me. I mean, she had records and 8 tracks, and so in the trailer we lived in, we had an old Ward's AM/FM record player, 8-track player. It had a couple of bookshelf-sized speakers, and I remember one of my first projects for helping out Granny is I mounted those speakers up on the wall, ran the wire and hit it, and then moved the receiver over by the TV so we could plug into that and actually have sound from the TV. Back then it was mono, there was no stereo, but he got sound out of the TV, and so Granny just thought that was cool that I mounted speakers on the wall, ran and hid the wire and hooked it up like that. So that was kind of cool, but really the thing that probably made me want to do something with audio, the cool factor of it, had nothing to do with car audio, but everything with it at the same time. And this is when I was in high school. Looking back, it would be, I'm trying to remember what year that Michael Jackson's album came out, the big one, Thriller, that everyone loved. Was that 84, 85?
Something like 83, yeah. I'm not sure.
That's 83, might have been 83. It was whatever that time frame was, because Van Halen Jump was out. That record, there was a bunch 82. Of those out, and of course, 82. There we go.
I wasn't.
So the thing in 1982 with me and everyone else is it was all about boom boxes. Boom boxes were the craze, and on our bus and at school, it was all about whoever had the loudest boom box was like you were the top cat on the block. And on the bus, the way it worked. Every morning on the bus, people get on with their boom box or the new boom box they just bought or whatever, and it's just like it was a sound off in the bus, and whoever had the loudest boom box won, and that was the person who got to play their choice of music for the entire school bus trip to school. So everyone was always trying to outdo the other person with their boom box. So I get this harebrained idea. This cook store I told you about, my granny actually worked there before I got a part-time job there. So, and at this cook store, like I told you, they sold Sparkomatic. So I had and I can't remember, it was either a Sony or a Panasonic, and I can't remember because my dad had one and I had the other. I'm pretty sure mine was a Sony. So I had a Sony boombox, cassette boombox, AM/FM cassette, and I was like, I'm going to win this loudness game. I've got this. So through my granny, who could get a 10% discount on anything down at the cook store, I went down with my paper route money, and I bought a set of Sparkomatic 6.5-inch car coaxial speakers. I bought a Sparkomatic 40-watt push-button power booster, and of course I had miscellaneous cables and stuff at home. I picked up some batteries, whatever, and so I go home, and I proceed to take my Sony boombox apart, take the speakers that are in the Sony boombox out, I Dremel out all the plastic that's in the way and everything, and I make these humongous, huge magnet Sparkomatic speakers fit into my Sony boombox. I then bring the signal that used to go to the speakers out of my Sony boombox, and I bring speaker wires back in. So I basically make an umbilical cord that's about 10 feet long, bring speaker signal out to bring speaker signal back into the speakers. And then I took this 40-watt Sparkomatic power booster and I hooked it up to the boombox. Now, when I did this was fall time in Ohio, and fall time in Ohio back then, I mean, it would get pretty cold out, and so I had a big a big heavy coat. That's how you stayed warm. And so I basically had the Sparkomatic power booster in one pocket of this coat, and in the other pocket of my coat, I had 2 6-volt lantern batteries wired in series for 12 volts. And I wired the power from the batteries through my coat. I took the seam of the coat apart and ran wire in the coat and sewed it back together to power up the power booster. So all I then had was this one umbilical cord that came out from my coat, and I had a Molex connector so I could plug into my boombox or unplug from my boombox.
Oh, wow.
So I get on the, the whole time I'm doing this, I feel like the mad scientist. I am just giggling as I'm putting this together. Oh, it was awesome. And so I already knew what it did because, of course, when I get it done, I fire it up and I was blown away. It's just like, it sounds great, it sounds okay, and then I reach down and hit that power booster button. It's like, oh my God. So get on the bus next day, I'm wearing my big heavy coat, I got my boom box, and I sit down and everyone's doing their sound off wars and everything's going on. And of course, it comes to my turn, and I turn it on, I turn it up to the pocket, because even back then, I learned that don't turn it up. I hated distortion, but I like it loud. And so I get it up there, and everyone's like, oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. He's the winner over here. Yours isn't that loud. And I just casually reach over into my pocket, and I reach down and hit that power booster button. And I swore the windows came out of that bus. And it was just this loud, wow. I mean, it just got loud. And everyone on the bus was like, oh, my God, what is that? How'd you do that? Oh, my God, that is just, when people are getting up, and they're like dancing around the aisle and doing stuff. It's just going crazy. And
bus driver's like, get down.
Yeah, get down, get it.
No, get out, sit down.
How did the bus driver react to all this?
Like Back to the Future with like the intro when it
Did he
blows
have
the
the boom
speaker up.
box?
Our bus driver was really cool, and he allowed us to do it. He enjoyed it. The only thing he would get into is, of course, if the language of the music was vulgar, he wouldn't let us play it. So, of course, you had to choose stuff that was appropriate. But he'd let us play it as loud as we went on the bus. He didn't care. And so from that day forward, let's just say for an extremely long time, I was the reigning champion. Now, the only bad part is I can tell you how fast a Sparkomatic booster will drain 2 6-volt landing batteries, and it's a good 10 minutes and you're done.
Yeah. Now, see, and here's how it's playing out in my head right now. Fast forward, just only a couple of years, then it's you and John Myers and Steve Irby's office, fighting for the job title right there. And then, that's when you pull the old 1-2 jacket pocket out on him,
But, I got to tell you, it was car audio product, but it was in a boom box. And there was just something, it was fun to design. It was fun to put that together because it was a learning experience. No one can say you've done something until you've done it. So I had never taken apart a boom box and removed the speakers and cut plastic out and made new mounts and mounted different speakers in and made an umbilical. I mean, I'd never done that. So it was all a new, cool learning experience. And when it all works, you're really proud of yourself. It's like, I did this, and this is awesome. And then, of course, to get accolades from your peers, everyone wants to do that occasionally. And so being able to be the guy on the bus for quite a long time was pretty darn cool. Like I said, I was the guy on the bus until the 2 6-volt landing batteries would go dead. And so,
somebody
for 10
picks
minutes,
up after that. You open the show, though, and you're about to be the guy on the show right now because we got about 15 minutes left on this. I want you to go over some of this wicked cool stuff on the table here. You told us a little bit before the process on cutting that unreleased Solo X right there.
Yes.
We got the one with the revision next to it, and then we get looks like a crispy, almost brand new looking gold letter sub that gave me cold chills when I saw it.
Well, I'll start over. I did bring this out for the show, and I'll just move it over here a little bit. Don't move on me. Stay there. So this is actually a woofer we had back in R&D, so I went and grabbed it, but this is an original gold letter kicker. And I thought coming on the show, there'd be nothing more appropriate than to bring out basically a mint gold letter kicker and show it off on the show. Those who know these were the woofers that everyone wanted to have back when they were released. Worked in small boxes. I jokingly tell people when it comes to woofers working in a small box, the original Kicker Gold Series comp, this is the original solo barrack. If you go back into the time frame when these woofers were released, which had been 1983, you could buy other 12-inch woofers. I mean, there weren't a lot of car woofers out. There were some. There was a lot of Pro Sound woofers. A lot of people used a lot of Pro Sound drivers. But to get good bass in a car, you'd have to build anywhere between a 3.5 and 5 cubic foot box for a single 12-inch driver. And so when Kicker came out with this gold letter comp driver, which this 12-inch driver, I know for a fact, because I did it, they sound great in a 1.25 cubes. They sound great in a 1.5 cubes. They sound great in 1.75. They sound great in 2.25. They had such a wide operating window in a sealed box that what was cool about it is Kicker came out with this and you're going, let's give you great bass, and you can do it in a 1.75 cubic foot box. And people are going like, how's that going to work? It takes 3.5, 4 cubic foot to get a 12-inch woofer to sound good. So Steve's philosophy, even from the start, was to try to make drivers that are efficient. They utilize the cabin gain that you get in a vehicle so that what you experience is great sounding bass in the driver's seat. And so I figured no better thing to bring out than the original gold letter comp, because this is really what started Kicker down the path of not just being famous for the loaded enclosures, the Kicker box, the Kicker 2, the Super Kicks, the Colts, all the stuff that Steve designed. But this was his first foray into actually making raw drivers. And I sold and installed these in retail, the gold letter drivers. I was so confident, and I tell people all the time in life, I've learned my wisdom. There's 3 C's to life. You can be conceited, you can be cocky, or you can be confident. And unfortunately, conceited and cocky, some people can deal with that, but really it doesn't play well very long. I like being confident. I just have to be careful that the confidence I exude doesn't come across or be felt as cocky or conceited. To me, that's the balancing act for all of this is if you know your stuff, be confident about it. Don't let people back you down. If you're right, you're right. But also, if you're not sure, be willing to say, I don't know, but I can find out for you. And I said that a lot when I was a trainer here at Kicker for the first couple years. Is they'd be like, people would ask me a question, I'm like, this is the answer, this is the answer, this is the answer. And then they'd ask me another one, I'd go, I really don't know the answer to that. I think I do, but I know people I can ask. Let me get the answer to that, and I'll get back to you. And so it was a learning experience for me. You got to know when to go, I'm confident in this. This is the answer. And you know what? I'm not confident in that. Let me get you the answer. And so,
guy.
Yeah. And this driver here, which at retail made it pretty scary for me, I'd have people come in all the time, and the thing is, it didn't matter to me what they had in their car. I didn't care if they had a Ryan or Rockford, or it didn't matter. I didn't care what brand subwoofer you had in your car. You could come in the store and we'd start talking, and I'd go, you know what? I said, I can sell you a pair of these Kicker 10s or a pair of these Kicker 12s. We can go out and throw them right in your box right now, and you'll have better sound right now. Really? I go, yeah, I guarantee it. No, there's no way. I said, I'll tell you what, are you ready to buy? Well, yeah, I came in to buy some speakers. I said, I'll tell you what. Let's roll these out there, throw them in. If they don't sound better than what you got, I'll take them back out and you roll on down the highway. But if you like them, here's a sales ticket. Let's come in and get some cash. Okay.
That's a great idea. Yeah, that's a good one.
Absolutely.
I never lost.
That's
ever.
like a snap-on sales tool trick
That's
that I do
crazy.
is he's like, hey, I'm going to loan you this Impact, man. Borrow it for a week, see how you
Yes.
like it.
all the time.
Well, little do you know is that's on your bill as soon as you go off the truck with it, okay?
Yes.
There's more times than not you're not going to return it.
I got a question for Kip.
Yeah,
Sure,
What
go ahead.
was the gravy that made that kicker work so much better in a smaller enclosure compared to the other drivers that couldn't, that needed a bigger enclosure? Was that more of like the isobaric technology that wasn't really isobaric yet?
Kind of, sort of. When it comes to speaker design, here's the thing that I'll share with you. I thought I understood speaker design, and when I came to work for Kicker and I got to understand, not just understand, but get to spend a lot of time with Mr. Irby himself, balance, 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 balance. Every speaker is about balance. You have to choose what you want to design a speaker for, but if you're trying to get something to work well across the board, it's all about balance. So, for example, that comp woofer right there, looking at it by today's standards, has a relatively small magnet on it. People look at the magnet, and unfortunately, people think that you can judge the performance of a speaker by the magnet size. And that's like kicking the tires on a car and thinking you found a good one. It tells you nothing, because what matters is the design, the voice coil, the number of layers, the winding, the gap, how much BL is in the gap. You know, Steve has always been focused on tight gap, tight gap, tight gap. Now, to do tight gap, that means you can have pretty tight tolerances across the board and everything else, because you don't want that coil rocking back and forth or rubbing against the top plate or rubbing against the pole piece. But when you do tight gap, you can get more BL in the gap with a tight gap than you can with a speaker with a loose gap that's got 3 times the motor. So you're
Is that
paying
because
for
of the
3
magnetic field around?
That's all it is. If you look at a speaker, and I don't want to go all whiteboard on everybody, but the way a speaker works is you got the pole piece in the middle, you got the pole, you got the back plate, okay, and then up at the top, you've got your top plate. And the pole sticks up through the top plate, and then there's that gap, that distance between the pole piece and the top plate, that is your air gap. And then the magnets that are in the middle between your top plate and your back plate, if you could visually see it, magnetic energy comes from the magnet, the north poles, and travels up through and to the top of the pole. Negative, the south pole energy travels to the top plate. And where those two meet in that air gap, literally air, that's where magnetic energy flows north to south, right there. So if you've ever played with magnets on your table, you can have 2 magnets that are very, very weak, and if you set them on the table, you've got to get them really close to each other before the one starts either attracting the other one or pushing it away. So the distance that magnetic energy has to travel across that air gap, hence the term for the word gap, the closer it's together, the more magnetic energy interaction there is. Whether it's 2 big magnets or 2 small magnets, they have a distance. As you get them closer and closer together, you're going to reach a point where, okay, now they start interacting, and either they'll push each other away or they'll pull each other together, depending on how you have the magnets facing each other. So those flux lines, they're called flux lines, the BL, okay, when you look at all that energy that's in the gap, you are creating that as a fixed magnet, a permanent magnet. And your voice coil is nothing but an electromagnet. It's an electromagnet It's wire wound around itself that goes over to a thing we call an amplifier, which is just a fancy term we like to use, which is for a frequency voltage device. And what that device does is it energizes that coil at a specific frequency and specific voltage. And so just like a magnet will attract and repel itself, that voice coil will attract or repel itself against that fixed magnetic field that's in the gap. So you can have a ton of power thrown into a speaker, but if it doesn't have anything to push and pull against, what's the power doing?
Yeah. You could have showed us the whole
Nothing.
thing on the open sub right there beside you.
Yeah, and talking about magnets here, we have about 5 minutes left. Is okay if we go a little bit over, I guess. But the how does this Solo X happen? How does this cutaway happen with the Solo X right here?
This is an actual cutaway of a prototype, so this is not the final driver, but this is our steps to making the speaker. And we wanted to have a cutaway for the original Unmasked show that we did to replace Cma last year, because everyone knows Cma was pulled and we couldn't attend that show. So this is a prototype. We wanted a cutaway. Normally, when we do cutaways, the magnets, we don't use real magnets, because cutting a magnet, typically when you slice into a magnet with a saw, a water jet, or even a laser, the magnets will just chip or sometimes even explode apart. They're very, very fragile actually when you cut on them. Normally we use pieces of wood in here. So if we do a display like this for a dealer, if we're going to build, say, 1,000 of these for dealer displays, we'll make this out of wood painted black so that we don't get into this chipping issue. But we needed this so fast, we couldn't get over. There's a town close to us and they have a water jet capability and laser. We couldn't get over to them in time. So actually a guy in the back did this on a bandsaw, and I got to tell you, I've tried to cut speakers with a bandsaw. This is a better job than I've ever done, especially on the magnets. There's a little bit of chipping here, but I'm actually shocked that those magnets didn't fly apart. So he cut it in the back. He took some sandpaper and kind of cleaned it up, and so this is a cutaway of one of the original prototypes for the L7X. And as you can see from the cutaway, it is a huge pole. This here, you can see this is actually, I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but there's actually a parting line right here. And you can see that this top part of the pole is actually separated from down here. And you can see there's a thread here where we could put a bolt through. This was done intentionally for prototyping because we actually played around with how tall do we want the pole in here, because as you add more pole in there, your voice coil has more area to sink heat into as it's moving up. And the other thing that comes into is we're working with how much air are we capturing to actually compress down through our forced air cooling. So this was a prototype, and we had that variable. Once we decided on how tall was the right tall, then in production this will be one solid piece of steel. But this is actually, as you can see, a proto model that was used for development. So this here, huge motor, triple stack magnet. The thing with magnets, if you're going to have a voice coil and on this, you're looking at, on the 10, we're looking at 3.2 inches mechanical peak to peak. On the 12, we're going to be at 3.3, and on the 15, we're going to be at 3.8. So you got to have a lot of space for that voice coil to move. So a lot of times magnets end up being filler material just so you can get the distance you need from the top plate to the bottom of your speaker.
Wow,
the thing with magnets, this magnet right here versus this magnet right here versus this magnet right here, as you start stacking magnets, doesn't matter who's designing it, by the way, folks, it doesn't matter. The first magnet in the motor applies a lot of its strength into the gap. The second motor in the stack applies most of its energy into the gap. The third magnet applies a little less than most into the gap. And so if you keep stacking magnets, you can do that if you just need to get the depth that you want for the speaker. But here's what's crazy about it, and why I tell you looking at magnets doesn't tell you the ultimate story of the performance of the speaker, because as you keep stacking magnets, the second magnet and the third magnet or the fourth magnet, you do not get a 100% of that magnet in the gap. They each get a little less and a little less and a little less. So you know how much strength you want in here, you calculate it, you shoot for what you want to do, you know how much depth you need from the mechanicals, you figure that out, and then really it becomes a game of balancing. You know, how much mass is there in the entire unit? More mass, lower efficiency. Less mass, higher efficiency. Gap, wider gap, you can have a lot of loose and flopping, but you're not going to have as much BL in the gap. Tighter gap, you're going to have more BL, but you got to make sure your parts keep everything linear as they move up and down. So again, this whole thing, when I get down to it, it's Steve Irby's design mantra. It's all about balance. Tell me what you want it to do, and we'll design it to do that. Is this speaker going to be as efficient or as loud on 100 watts as, say, an original gold letter kicker comp? No, this one at 100 watts is going to kick its butt. This will play more bass, it'll play louder bass, it's more efficient. But If you look at me and say, well, my design criteria is I want to move a boatload of air at 28 hertz and I want to float things in my window, this is not the speaker for you. This is the speaker for you. Just understand you're going to have a big box or a fourth order to get your efficiency, and you're going to have a lot of power to drive it. There's nothing wrong. There's no perfect speaker. There really isn't. It's all trade-offs. What do you want in your application? And that's the biggest thing is be honest about your application. If all you have is 100 watts of power, if you're coming to me and we're talking kicker line here and you say, I got 100 watts, that's all I've got, and I want to get some of the best sounding bass I can, my answer is going to be, well, let's look at a comp. Let's look at a comp RT and maybe a comp R, but really a comp or a comp RT is probably your best choice because they're going to be some of the more efficient speakers that's going to give you the most output for that 100 watts. Well, a comp doesn't play low bass. No, a comp plays all the way down to 20 hertz just fine. What you have to understand is a comp at full capability only gives you this much of 20 hertz. This speaker at full capability gives you that much of 20 hertz. How much of it do you want? And set your expectations, because if this is what you want, well, now you got to have a big amplifier. And if you got to have a big amplifier, you got to have a big power system. That's cable, that's ground, that's batteries, that's alternator, that's everything else. You can't start here and think you're going to get big sound. It's the whole enchilada. Everything.
There's levels to it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of people don't realize too. We bring it up all the time. I want to go get this big banging sub. I'm going to take stock charging system. It's okay. I'll add a battery later, whatever. Like, dude, a lot of times, especially if you're going with a non-proprietary design and inefficient amplifier, you're going to have to spend more money on the charging system out of the box to support that amplifier than you would spending less money getting something that's more efficient, even if it's run the same power area.
We know we're going to sell a lot of these. I mean, the demand for a new, and I say new Solo X, this is the L7X. It's part of the new Solo X family. So read into that what you will.
You had made big amps a while back.
So there's going to be other things coming. This is specific built for people who want to do a specific goal, which is move a lot of air at low frequencies and do the kind of things that you do with those systems. The flip side of that is just because we do this driver doesn't mean that any of these other drivers go away. Like you can't see it in the picture, but like I've got comp RTs and comp Rs and here on display. Most consumers who just want great sounding audio in their car and they're not looking to float babies and bricks, that's my term for it affectionately. They just want. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there are a whole lot more people that they want to take their car, they don't want to upgrade the alternator, they don't want to add a whole bunch of batteries, they just want to use the speaker locations that are in the car, they want to add some bass, and they want better than what they have, and they want to get something, and when you go that route, efficiency is the name of the game. So that's why if you look at, we make like 14 different enclosures, the down-firing TRTPs, the CWRT boxes, we make about 14 different enclosures. All of them are designed to work great on 500 watts of power, which is not a lot of, in today's world, really, 500
watts.
watts.
The quad box isn't much. The quad box isn't a lot of power.
That quad box will do you a solid 150 with 2,400 watts.
Yeah, KX, and you're good to go. 150.
And you're good to go. And a KX, don't get me wrong, if you're using a KX 2400, you're at that point where you need to have the conversation at least about an extra battery or two. If you've got a high output alternator from the factory that maybe is $130 or $150, you might get away with just adding an extra battery or two. But I always tell people this and caution them. I remember back in my day where a 110 amp alternator was a huge upgrade. Cars didn't come with 110 amp, but they came with 60, 65s. If you got 110, so people today, they get their cars today, and a lot of vehicles, trucks, everything, they come with 120, 140, and 160 amp alternators, and people are like, man, I am set. I got the high output alternator I need. I can throw any audio gear here and I want. What they fail to realize is the only reason that size alternator is in that truck is because all of the electrical stuff that they designed in that truck need that. The factory's not building it to give you extra output. They put in what they need just so the vehicle will work reliably. So now you start putting in big bass into a truck like that, don't fool yourself. That 160 amp alternator is not what you need. How much you're going to put in that vehicle is going to determine, do I need a 220, a 240, a 300? What do I need? Because that big alternator is only big because the factory knew it needed that much to keep up with the vehicle.
So crazy, right? Yeah, those KXs need some power too, man. I had it on a stock alternator on 4 AGM 3100 series, Group 31s. I was dipping, I'd see 11s, man, but I was clamping 2,000 watts. It was still doing it, but.
What impedance? What did it rise to?
Well, I was rising down to about 3 to 2, depending, what I was playing. But yeah, whenever I would see really low.
At a higher
What's that?
impedance. I love when amps do more than rated at a higher impedance than they're rated
Oh
for.
yeah, the kicker amp, especially even at 4 ohms, man, you're going to see well over that 1200 that it's rated at, and even with the CX series too, they're going to do a tad over.
Shoot.
Yeah, that's how it should be. And like Kip was saying, how they sound good on 500 watts. When you're playing music, you're not full tilt. When you're not in that pocket, like say from even the KX 2400 on music, you're not doing more than 500 to 1,000 watts unless you're really, really going into it. So the fact that everything is designed to be in that power range is really impressive, and that kind of speaks to the success of Kicker too. Because I mean, you can really just throw whatever kicker system in whatever, and it sounds good.
We try. I mean, we've had some stinkers over the years. Not everything we make is ever perfect. There's been problems. There's been problematic product over the years. But when you're designing and building stuff, that's what you learn as you go along. The thing that I will say about Kicker as a whole is we make solid, dependable product. As a brand, it's made offshore. There are some things we make here in the USA, and unfortunately, guys, I can talk about this in a bar with a beer with anybody all night long if they want to, but in reality, Kicker was one of the last companies here in the USA to actually go offshore for manufacturing.
Rockford did in 06.
Rockford and other manufacturers were already offshore, and the company that we used to actually build the speakers, so like the original Gold Letter, we didn't build these in-house. Steve designed them, and we had them manufactured to our specs by a company here in the United States of America. They went out of business. So what people don't realize is over the years, what's happened here in the United States of America are the companies that were able to do all of the pressing and make the metal parts, the companies who make the magnets, the people who could stamp the baskets, the people who could make the cones, the companies that can wind the voice coils, the companies that can make the spiders. All those companies who make those parts either went out of business or it all got farmed offshore.
This is years ago now, though, too.
Yeah,
so
we're talking years.
So
years
even the
ago.
people that pay, that even you see a lot of, even the companies today. Now there are quite a few. I won't say a handful is more realistic that do made in USA. What a lot of people don't realize are because just like you were saying, how all of these components to these products aren't even made in the US anymore. It's really you're paying a premium for assembly. I'm not saying you're not getting a better product. With maybe better QC and all that stuff, and components be really nice, but nothing's made here. So again, you're paying for assembly.
Yeah. And there are some things like we did the video. Was it 2 weeks ago? We did I'm trying to remember. We did the woofer thing last week or the week before, and so like the Santoprene that we use on all these drivers. If we use Santoprene, now if we use foam that comes from a China, Thailand, Taiwan, Japan vendor. Santoprene, we've learned over the years. I don't know what it is, but the Chinese and the Taiwanese, they cannot figure out how to make Santoprene right. It always has a problem. And we had they'll tell us, oh, we've got it figured out. It's all fixed. Use it. And then we'll do a run of drivers. And that first batch that goes out, we'll have cracking problems here in the corners or stuff like that. So we've just learned that for Santoprene, we buy raw Santoprene here. We ship it over. It's turned into the sheet that we need, and then those sheets are then made into the surrounds. But we use a USA-made Santoprene. It's just that. Precision Econowind is a company that's down in Florida that you can buy voice coils from. We do buy voice coils from Precision Econowind. They go over to our manufacturer and they go into our speakers. So we do use some USA-made stuff here. The thing for us, and it's a balancing act, and it's a challenge, and I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I mean, I'm a made in USA. I love where I live, everything. Don't get me wrong. But the reality is we can't make everything here because it's just not capable. And even though Kicker is a fairly successful company, we don't have the resources to vertically integrate and bring all that back here and do all the parts manufacturing here in the United States of America and final assembly. We don't have that capability. And I'm not knocking on them at all, but it's why you see people like JL, and they say assembled in the USA, not made in the USA, because what they're doing is they're bringing in all the raw parts from offshore vendors, and they're doing just that final assembly process here in the United States of America.
Some of them are dropping boards. Some of them are legitimately dropping the board in the heatsink. Okay, a lot of people don't realize this. Assembled in the USA. Wow. Dropping so they're not paying for so the two different facilities. One makes the case, one makes the amp. They put it with thermal paste, drop it in, button it up. A QC test, but that's it.
If you go back to everyone has a fond spot in their heart for those original SX amplifiers. First it was the all-black chassis. They looked like the waffle grill, and then they're the ones that had the ground top on them. Everyone has a fondness in their heart for that. The cool part about those amplifiers is during that time frame, the chassis were actually, the aluminum itself was actually done in Southern California and Mexico. We actually had vendors in Southern Cal and Mexico that did the aluminum forming for us, and those were shipped here to Stillwater. When they were black, we didn't do any other post-processing to them. When we went to the ones that had the milled top, we actually did the milling on those here in-house. And the reason we don't do milling of aluminum here in-house anymore is because if the clamping feet on a mill happen to go bad or break during the milling process, it throws a chassis at about 180 mile an hour into the wall. And if you have a human being in the way of that, it's not good for you. So we don't do that anymore. But during that time frame on those two series of amplifiers, we had the sinks made in Mexico and Southern Cal. The ones that had the ground top, we ground them here at Kicker. And then the boards for those amplifiers came in from Thailand and Korea. We had boards built in those two places. And so basically, we milled the board. We put the circuit board that was done into the chassis. We attached the end caps on there. We did the final biasing and tuning and tweaking on the board, setting everything, because back then on Class AB amplifiers, you had to do a lot of adjusting of biasing to get the sound quality and efficiency you're looking for. They were finally tested, they were packaged up, and they were sent out. They were made in the USA. We were able to get away with it back then and say that, although the FTC has a little bit of tighter guidelines today on how you can say things like that. But the board wasn't made here, so people who just go, "Oh, it's the best amplifier, I just love it, blah, made in the USA." Well, it was assembled in the USA.
That's the thing I hear all the time. They're like, "Oh yeah, Kicker was better then," and it's like, what do you mean? What do you mean?
People tell us that, and it's just, there's always going to be a soft spot for whatever old school product you had. No matter when you get into car audio, your first stuff is the cool stuff that you're familiar with, no matter when you get in.
Nostalgia.
I do think a lot of the gear from the 80s, it's almost like a classic car. I don't care how far we go forward in time. A 2020 Honda is never going to be a classic car, but a 57 Chevy is always going to be a classic car. And so there's a lot of gear from a lot of companies in that 80s time frame that's going to remain timeless and classic no matter when you get into it. And so I think there's a lot of that people get attached to. But I will say this. It's not just me. I mean, I could look at spreadsheets and tell you, when it comes to defective rate and how many amplifiers have come back and have problems, we had a higher defective rate back in that time frame than we have today on CX amplifiers today.
And people are doing way worse things to them, too. And on top of that, too, and I'll use it as an example, too. Ask, Casey's here from what Andy's doing for a little while. I was the Rockford guy, okay? I probably had...
It was so annoying, too.
25, 30 of the Rockford T-amps, okay? And I'm like, nothing can beat these things. Nothing beats it. Well, we got the SMD aim in one. I clamped a whole 1,200 watts or something like that at 6 ohms on my T4000. And I'm like, I'm getting every drop of 4,000 watts plus this. And then I realized that. And then you have a realization like, hey, the old school, there's modern features, more power, smaller package, everything. Even if, like, for instance, like the T4000, that's like a 17 or a 20K size amp now. You know what I mean? We're talking about 4 or 5 times the power and actually make it.
Exactly.
There's a trade-off on that side, too, because you may not clamp as much power, but you have a really efficient setup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were efficient for a D class or whatever you want to call it.
No, for sure. This trade-off that we go back to.
Man, I remember, I built and sold and installed system after system after system in the day where 100 watts times 2 was huge amplifier power. And if you wanted more, you put in 2 amplifiers. And if you wanted more, you put in 3 amplifiers. And if you wanted more, you put in 4 amplifiers. It's because 100 watts by 2 was all you had.
But hey, on the same note, though, and I've brought it up before, like, legitimately the best sounding stereos I've ever heard, and it goes back to what Casey was saying before, have been way under 1,000 watts. Like, as far as like 1,000 watts total power, I'm not even talking about RMS. 1,000 watts total power, best systems I've ever heard.
If you're not looking to do the extreme stuff, and there's nothing wrong with the extreme stuff, I think it's cool too. It's not something I would do in my daily driver, but if I had a junk car, and I was going to do something, I'd be all about throwing in, a couple 15s of this in a huge box and doing stuff. It would be that. It wouldn't be my daily driver. But in my daily driver, with what I listen to on a daily basis, a properly set up system with some good components up front, some coaxes in the back, and a properly done subwoofer box that's efficient, 1,000 watts is all you need all day long to drive around and enjoy music. Mm-hmm. Now, you just have to understand, what's your purpose? Pick your purpose and then design from there.
Heck yeah. Well, hey,
Absolutely.
I'm going to take and open it up. Casey, do you have anything for Kip? And you got anything for Kip? And then chat, chime it in. I think we're going to wrap this up in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Chris Vera was asking about. I think the answer is yes, but he was saying he was asking if the Comp Q surrounds were made here too, just like how you make
the material stuff.
Yeah.
If it's Santoprene, more than likely the raw material came from here in the United States of America. Now, there have been times in our past, because what will happen is our vendors will tell us, oh, we've got it figured out, we know what the problem is, and then we'll move to their Santoprene, and then it starts having problems. So what we do is we have to run through all those woofers. Some people have problems, some people don't. The people who have problems, they end up coming back, we warranty the driver out, and then we have to shift gears and go back to, okay, we're going to have to do the next run of these, and we're going to have to move back to the USA-made Santoprene. So are there drivers out there that have USA Santoprene and Chinese or Taiwan Santoprene? The answer is yes. Does everyone have a problem with the Taiwan Santoprene or the Chinese? Not everyone, but it's the people who are getting into situations typically with long throw, i.e. a sealed box, because in a sealed box is where you're really going to stress any woofer out. In a ported box at resonance, the woofer's hardly moving. So if you're doing a sealed box and you're throwing a ton of power to it to get that woofer to move and do its thing in a sealed box, that's where you're going to see breakdown on your surrounds way sooner than in a ported box.
Cigar Joe.
No, it's good you say that though. Heck yeah. I think it's funny too though. I don't know. Going back to it, for instance, like the transition from that to rubber, the different surround styles. Like I had 2 gold letters in like an old school hatchback box when I was in high school. I never actually got to hear them because I got them and they had the surrounds turned to dust and fell off. But I've been admiring those. The going back to the surround thing and why that's such important. What you were saying, those tight gaps as far as the pole and everything like that. That speaker has to stay very, very linear for that to work properly.
Absolutely. It has to stay very linear for it to work, and that's where Steve Irby is totally focused on. Steve does not want to... I'm trying to think of the right way to say this so it doesn't come across wrong to you or anyone in your audience. If you know what you're going to design a speaker for, and this is its goal, it's going to be designed to handle 300 watts, it's going to work in this size box, and we want to do all these criteria, we have to design it at a price point that is a price point that we know we can sell it to a dealer for, that a dealer can turn around and sell it to a consumer for. Everyone in the chain feels like they got a good value and that they feel that the driver performs the way they want. So here's what we look at. We know that a comp is a 300 watt woofer, peak, 150 watts RMS. It needs to do this, it needs to do this, it needs to do this. So if we can keep the gap tight, if we can do all this, we can do this, we can use a smaller magnet. Or if we make the gas loose and sloppy, we're going to have to go to a bigger magnet. If we have to go to a bigger magnet, it costs more money. So if we can design everything down to achieve the goal and be efficient in doing it, it makes it less money to us, which makes it less money to the dealer, which makes it less money to the consumer. So we want to engineer for the goal and the purpose, and we want to engineer out anything that just adds cost but doesn't add performance for that speaker or amplifier or whatever's goal. And I hope I'm saying that right and people understand it is.
It makes sense.
Yeah, you're like, does it add bass? No? Okay, cool. Make it better.
And let me ask you this, Kip. So I was at Slamology. I saw the cutout speaker. I was like, how in the world did they cut this thing in half without anything chipping or breaking? It looks like that might have some serious tolerance, like real tight on the new Solo X.
It does. It does. I don't know if you can get a good zoom in on it if you pull out, but understand that this voice coil, and I know people are going to ask this because we've already done the whole conversation on Kicker Unmasked where we've talked about copper-covered aluminum wire versus pure copper wire for power wire. I'll go on the record and stand by it all day long. Do not buy CCA wire for your power wire. Just don't do it. You're not doing yourself any favors. Well, that opens up a whole can of worms because then people ask the question, well, what about aluminum wire and a voice coil or copper-covered aluminum wire and a voice coil and stuff like that? And I go, okay, that material is being chosen and specifically built for that driver. You might use CCA or aluminum because you need to save weight in the mass. As long as you use the right gauge wire and you account for the loss or the higher resistance of the wire and the speaker will do its function, there's nothing wrong with doing CCA wire in a coil or aluminum for its function. So I just want to make sure when we have those conversations, people don't hard left, hard right. Hard left, don't use CCA wire for your main power wire. Hard right, speakers are designed for a goal. Aluminum can be used, CCA can be used, flat wound, round wound, edge wound. There's all sorts of technologies. I will not say one is better than the other because at the end of the day, the engineer who designed this has a lot of things that he has to balance to get that driver to do what the stated goals are. So don't get too hung up on what's in the voice coil. As long as it's been designed to do its job, it doesn't matter. So in this cutaway, you can see this is, and I don't know what we finalized on yet, but as you can see, this is a Cca voice coil right here. It's an aluminum coil. Or it's an aluminum core with copper over it. And you can see it's a little, when you cut through with a saw, that coil is going to flatten out a little bit. So it might be giving a little bit of an impression that it's really tight, tighter than it is. But I think you can see the gap on this is extremely tight. And by keeping that gap tight, we're focusing more of this magnetic energy here, because that's the only place that magnetic energy from these magnets matter. There's only one place it matters, and it's right here in that air gap. That's it. Doesn't matter anywhere else, because all you're trying to do is create a magnetic field there that the voice coil can attract and repel itself against. That's the key. When you cut away a speaker, you look at them, most people think a motor's a motor's a motor's a motor. That's not true. One of the things here you'll notice is this back plate and this pole piece. That is one solid piece of steel. And if you watched the L7T video we did 2 weeks ago, you can see we actually have one. Okay, that is pressed as one solid piece. I make a big point about that because there are still companies today that this pole piece and this back plate are two separate pieces of steel, and they're either put together with adhesive or they're staked together, meaning that it's a press fit. As soon as you create a parting line right there, two things happen. Number one, you're asking magnetic energy to jump the gap. If you're jumping, and even though those pieces are right up against each other, you're still asking it to jump a gap. So when you have two pieces put together, you lose magnetic energy that's trying to flow from here up to here. Number two, this back plate, one of its jobs is also, it's a radiator. Literally like a car. A radiator in your car takes heat away from the engine and tries to keep it away from the motor so it doesn't melt. All this heat that the pole piece picks up, it's trying to pull that heat to the back. It's trying to get it to the back plate so that it can naturally radiate or convect away from the speaker. If you have a parting line there, the heat now has to conduct through a parting line, so it's not as efficient as transmitting the heat.
Like a CPU with no thermal paste.
There you go. There you go. And then the other thing is, if it's not staked together, if it's glued together, adhesives are insulators. All of them are insulators of some kind. So now you're asking the heat to go up against an insulator and then find its way to the back plate to get away. We use solid motor structures on everything, and it was such a big deal that in the original kicker drivers that Steve came out with, we actually call it the uniplate, meaning this is one solid piece of steel that goes through cold forming and it's turned into the back plate and the pole. It matters. You can make a speaker cheaper not doing that, and a lot of people do. And if you go down that route, you could probably make a speaker that will work fine if it's engineered well, but two things happen. Heat doesn't transfer as well, and neither does magnetic energy, and there's no way around that. The only way is make it one piece. So that's something that we design on all of our speakers because it matters.
You know what you never have to worry about what that is? Never have to worry about pole shift.
Ever.
That too.
Yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ever.
I'm not going to drop name brands, but I see quite a few other big named SPL subwoofers shift poles quite often. Now it's baffle, flex, stuff like that does it, but I don't think it's going to be a problem on that L7.
That pole will not shift.
That's
Yeah.
Those gaps are so tight.
Yeah.
I know kickers, man. My buddy Seth, he pretty much teaches me how to take them apart and recone them the best way you can. And those gaps, that's the first thing he says. These gaps are so tight. It's just like you said, the tolerance levels between the two and just how you guys engineer it. You guys don't engineer it so you could throw in a bigger coil and you know what I mean, like more power handling. You guys build it the way you want.
Well, okay. Understand, you tell me when the show's over because I will talk all night long, okay? So just tell me when you're
we got like 5 minutes, okay? Yeah.
Just tell me when you're done. So here's the thing. There's a thing in the design of anything that has multiple parts, and it's called stack-up error. So if you have all these different parts that are being punched or machined on different machines, there's tolerances that you have to deal with. And tolerances can drift one way or the other over time. Tools can wear. All sorts of things can happen. And if at the end of the day, you say, okay, our tolerance on this is plus or minus 0.001 centimeters or 0.001 millimeters, whatever the tolerance is, you have to account for every part that you have is going to have drift. So when you stack up the errors, are you going to be within everything work. Yeah, it all adds up. If I have a 0.0, if I have too much error here and then the next piece has error and the next piece has error, they're not all perfect, and I build it all up, what's my total error at the top? Is it still going to work? So stack up error is one of the areas our engineers are, I'll say, kick ass at. They are fantastic at building these different parts and sub-assemblies that when they stack up and get together, as long as the tools don't wear out, they work really well. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is one of the reasons the old Solo X, the original Solo X, is you cannot buy spares for them anymore is there's stack up error in that and the way all that works, because basically the spare that went in, there was the whole aluminum frame and the motor, and then the speaker, which was on a metal basket and everything else, went into that. On the original Solo X, the way those lined up, there was a pin in the aluminum basket and there was a hole in the spare, and when you dropped the spare in and it dropped over that pin, that hole, that was supposed to line everything up. Well, due to tools that wear out over time, you may take a Solo X spare and drop it in and goes over that hole in that pin, and the voice coil rubs. Stack up error has happened. And so in the life of that driver, there was a point where we had to go back and redo the tools for the spares. We did. And we continued making those parts. And after we went through 2 cycles of tools, and that put us at almost 20 years of making parts for that driver, we made the decision to not invest any more money in the tools for that driver, but to move forward into this. And even though this driver is a little bit different in how it works and how the pull-apart piece comes out, it's not the same. It won't be the same as the old Solo X. This is, you have to take the whole speaker out. You got to get the screws that are underneath. So it's a different process. But here's the cool part. Our engineers took what we learned from the original Solo X and all the reasons for stack-up error, and we now have a way to do this that eliminates all those stack-up error problems, because we're actually allowing you to put shims in from the back side. You drop everything together. That voice coil is always going to be centered on the pole, right where it needs to be. You clamp it down and put it together, and then you pull the shims out of the back. It's as accurate putting together a spare into an L7X out in the field as it is building it brand new on the assembly line. So I only bring that up to talk about why did the Solo X die? Well, the Solo X died for a couple reasons. Number one, 2006 to 2008, the economy crashed. No one was attending big SPL shows. You don't build what people aren't buying. Kicker made a decision. We're going to be here on the other side of this recession, and we survived and came out stronger than ever because of the decisions we made on that. And we support, we supported that original Solo X as long as we could, to the point that we reinvested and did tooling one more time to keep people satisfied. But we've made the hard decision that we're going to get away from that old technology, that legacy technology, and we're going to move to this, because this, besides more performance, it's going to be better for you in the field when it comes to replacing it, because the stack-up error is way more controlled because of this design. And so there's a lot of learning and lessons in there that apply to this, and I felt that was appropriate to share.
No, it's cool. And a lot of people, you know, I was actually a machinist for a little while by trade, and freshly out of high school before I started doing tattoo work. But a lot of people don't realize, like, I was cutting I worked for RBM, and they did government contracts they cut a metal called Inconel, which is actually like one of the most, it's $100 inch by inch, or it was at the time, like over a decade ago. And they used it for AMC and Bravo tank roller bearing for ball bearings, right? So when they take in, when you're actually, there's such a tight tolerance on that, and something I'm assuming close to the kicker, they're actually measuring down to about the thickness of a human hair on these, and within tolerances, because they stack up over the course of a whole entire track. The thing on that too is you have to measure not only your part you take off, you're making adjustments for how much it's actually eaten off of the tool. Oh, so like it's pretty insane. So like it has big change.
Exactly. So what's cool is with that background that you have, it really kind of, even though we're talking about 2 completely different products, the terminology and what's happening is the same. Tool wear and stack-up error is a reality that we as a company have to deal with every day. And because we believe in balance, we believe in only putting in how much money it takes to get the goal for that speaker. We don't want to put more in that you're paying for that you don't need. We believe in tight gaps. You just have to do everything else right. You do everything else right, tight gaps work great. You don't do everything else right, you got to go to a sloppy gap. You go to a sloppy gap, you're lowering your BL. So it's a hamster wheel. Just decide which way you want to go.
Hell yeah. We got 2 minutes left. Kip, I genuinely appreciate your time, man. And if anybody has any questions you want to finish it up on, Andy, Casey, you got anything? But killer episode, man. Like, you take out of your Friday time for us. This is an awesome experience, man.
Yeah.
I think he covered all my questions for tonight. How about you, Casey?
Man, I don't know. I learned a lot, and that's the cool thing, man. There's always like new stuff to learn. That's why I love audio so much. Is You know, I've
I'm
been doing
always
this for
learning,
11
yeah.
years now, but like I still learn something new all the time, and it's always interesting. It always challenges you. You know, especially if you set a goal and go for it, and you might be over ambitious, and then when you hit that goal and maybe go a little above it, like it's just a rush. You know what I mean? So I'm in it for the love of audio, man. Always have been. And it's
I
cool to learn
love
some new
taking
stuff,
tuning, and when
sure.
you hear that new nuance, like you have a song that you think you know, you're like, I know that. Oh yeah, there we go. I didn't even think about that. I think Andy's got one too. But the
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you know it.
I know this song, and then you tune your setup, you do something different, you change speakers, and you hear that one new nuance that you never heard before, and you're like, I've done it. Like it's all worth it. You know what I mean?
Ooh.
You know, guys, and there's a lot of comments in the feed, and I'm like, believe it or not, I can be a pretty emotional guy at times. I only have one feeling, but it's pretty strong. And so I'm going to try to say this and not get too, you know, I've accepted the term Uncle Kip, and of course, people talk about my Kipisms and things that come out through the show and other things, and I take all that as a compliment. And you know, a lot of these guys will say, you know, Uncle Kip and the wisdom, the things, guys. I appreciate that you enjoy the things I can share with you. Just understand, I learned this a long time ago in my life. I'm smart enough to know I'm dumb enough that every day if I pay attention, I'm going to learn something else. I'm glad to share with you what I know, but understand I'm always learning every day too, so I appreciate you.
Dude, that's killer. We're going to wrap it up on that. Fantastic words. This is Rolling Thunder, episode 17. This is Kiplitzy Unmasked. I appreciate everyone's time. You have a fantastic evening. We'll be doing it again next week. I appreciate everyone's time and have a killer week.